Good afternoon. It is snowing, and so I am at home. That is my excuse. It is legitimately, it is intensely. I don't know that it's going to stick super much, but you can't see outside. It is blowing snow. And it's getting colder. The temperatures are going down, and I'm staying home is the answer. So that's what's happening. So we'll go ahead and get started.
We're in the middle of a snowstorm here in Minnesota as well.
Well, yeah, but you live in Minnesota.
Good point.
No one told me that. People were like, oh, you know, yeah, it snows, but like within an hour it's gone. That's not true. It depends on the where the sun is. Like if it's at all shaded, it still can last for weeks. If there's no direct sunlight. So anyway, it's fine. So we'll start by setting our motivation. So I think, again, we try to generate those minds of confidence in the teachings, relating to the Buddha as unmistaken, non-deceptive, as his path as reliable and repeatable, dependable. Something that we ourselves have the capacity to actualize in this life. This perfect human rebirth. And wanting to accomplish that, mainly to be of limitless benefit to sentient beings. To fully awaken our potential. So we try to establish those minds of refuge and bodhicitta as our motivation for engaging in the material. All right. So as promised, we begin our exploration of the topic of the sufferings of the lower realms in particular. So we're still in the section. I don't know if you guys can see. You probably can't see. No. Oh, it's because it's blurred is the reason. It's really impressive what's happening.
Venerable, what is it?
The snow. Oh, it's still too bright.
Oh,
I'm
sorry. I thought it was some hell being.
It is whiteout conditions out there right now.
And literally. I'm up in Chupadero. I'm up in the mountains and we're clear as can be.
Literally whiteout conditions. Pretty glad I'm I decided I wasn't going to go out in that. Okay, what is happening? No, I can't find. Oh well. Oh, because it's just right there. Okay. Okay. So, yes, so we're going to be exploring the sufferings of the lower realms. So we're still in the broad section on the Lamrim on the low scope. So the goal of the low scope in general is to orient ourselves toward creating the causes and conditions for good future rebirths. So we don't actually look at the disadvantages of the upper realms until the middle scope, when we develop renunciation toward all of cyclic existence. Here, we haven't, essentially, these teachings haven't become that sophisticated yet. We're still just trying to avoid the most painful states within ordinary cyclic existence at this point. We'll need to get eventually to a point where we refine our motivation and our understanding to include even the upper realms, in terms of seeing them as a good in and of themselves, an intrinsic good. But we still would see human realm rebirths, and perhaps you could also say some rebirths in Pure Lands where there's tantra and so on. See those sorts of upper realm, those beneficial upper realm rebirths as having utility for practicing the path. And then there are still upper realm rebirths that don't have that utility, like the long-lived gods, desire realm gods, the form and formless realm. So those are upper realms without any benefit, which would characterize some upper realms. But anyway, so that's later. Right now, we're just thinking about the kinds of rebirth in cyclic existence that are the most difficult to experience, in order to then understand what karmic causes generate those sorts of rebirths, so that we can purify any existing karmic seeds that might give rise to that sort of experience, and no longer create new negative karmic seeds that we would understand to be related to creating that kind of experience. That's the goal. The goal isn't, again, as we've said before, whenever we are looking at some of the disadvantages of cyclic existence, it isn't that is meant to give rise to a sense of hopelessness, because we're not without the tools to do something to avert that. It is to alert us to those tools and to focus our attention on those tools, so that we actually employ those tools, that we don't disregard them, that we don't exclude that, from our practice, that we don't skip that step and we just think, oh, well, I'll just think about bodhicitta. I'll just think, without controlling body, speech, and mind, guarding the three doors of karmic action. And, so the purpose is to make sure that we stay on track, and that we go in a logical, step-by-step way, adding and refining our understanding as we progress. So day 114 is the first contemplation, and the quote from Lama Zopa is, "Others' lives are in danger, and so is our own." So here, even, it's kind of interesting, even on the first contemplation, Lama Zopa is kind of bringing in the Mahayana way of relating to the lower realms, by recognizing that other beings are experiencing these states. And I think we've kind of said before, if you were to poll, all of reality at any given moment in time, the majority of the sentient beings alive are experiencing one of the three lower realms, because the total number of sentient beings is something, as I understand it, it's probably something less than genuinely mathematically infinite, but it's such a huge, extraordinarily mind-numbingly large number that I don't know, to some degree you could say it approaches infinity, or something like that. But still, in the three lower realms, all of the realms get progressively smaller as you go up, because the causes and conditions to take rebirth in the upper realms, those causes and conditions get progressively more difficult to amass. But one way, one of the predominant ways of thinking about this is kind of that, you find in like the Lamrim Chenmo and so on, is kind of to think about it in terms of oneself. But here Lama Zopa, even right from the very first contemplation, is suggesting that we use this topic as a way of deepening our compassion for sentient beings. Thinking of that right now, in this moment, I'm not experiencing this, but most of the sentient beings that exist, that are, parallel with my existence, are experiencing this, which is one way of lighting that kind of fire for our practice, in terms of orienting us and giving us a real reason to want to achieve, to go through the stages of the path to perfect one's own mind, is to do something about that condition that sentient beings are dealing with. But that's not the entirety of what Lama Zopa is pointing out in the first contemplation. He's also pointing out that, as we've said, this idea that the easiest causes and conditions to create correlate with rebirth in one of the three lower realms, that is a statement of fact that isn't only true for every other sentient being. That's also true for oneself. So in past lives, we've amassed a lot of that kind of not so great karmic potential. And even in this life, we have created and continue to create causes and conditions to give rise to that kind of experience. Because we have never been free of the self-cherishing mind, the mind that prioritizes our likes, our desires, our interests, our preferences, above those of every other sentient being. We strive to maximize pleasure and enjoyment and ease and contentment in everything that we do, even now, and sometimes can be at the expense of others. Instead of offering that opportunity to someone else, we take it for ourselves, and even attachment and aversion is a problematic karmic tendency in the mind, and that's something that we can do without any other sentient beings being around, in terms of just how we relate to food and entertainment, and we're doing things that are furthering tendencies and habits that are not ideal, and we've done that for beginningless past lives. So there's a great deal of that negative karma that has been stored up over that time. So he does say it is. He says, therefore, it is much more likely that we will be reborn in the suffering lower realms than in the fortunate upper realms, and it is crucial to understand exactly what the lower realms and their causes are, in order to do everything possible to avoid them. So that's the purpose of this whole topic, is to, it's part of understanding the Four Noble Truths, suffering and its causes, and then the path, and then the fact that suffering is not unavoidable, and that there is a way of reliably avoiding it. So any questions, thoughts so far?
Venerable, just in the last couple of minutes, you summarized quite a bit of Monday's teaching, and went over 3 points that I've been thinking about. One is you were talking about kind of the grosser hindrances just now, and you mentioned on Monday, you said there are subtle hindrances. I was wondering if you might talk about those for a moment.
Can you remind me what I said?
I wish I could, but you were talking about basically what you just said a couple of minutes ago about, the grosser hindrances that we deal with body, speech, and mind. And then you said, and then the subtle hindrances, and then you moved on, and it struck me later, thinking about what you were talking about, and I wondered what the subtle hindrances were, if they're more subtle mental hindrances or emotional hindrances, or
it could be. I'm not entirely sure, but it could be, like, in terms of, if you look at, I think maybe it was in relation, we were talking about the vows, like the different levels of vows, and how they become progressively more difficult to maintain. So, and that's true kind of with karma in general. Like, for example, the 5 lay vows, to not kill, not steal, not lie, not commit sexual misconduct, not take intoxicants. Those are pretty overt things. We have complete control, at least in theory, over whether we ingest something or whether we say something that we know to be untrue. Of course, we're also under the influence of powerful familiarities. So, the idea of control is relative in that sense. But the idea that, like a fleeting thought of ill will, that is, that's not one of the five lay vows, right? The Buddha didn't say you're taking a vow not to have an unkind thought toward sentient beings, because that's subtler, that's so much more difficult to do. But he later does talk about, like in the 10 non-virtuous actions, he talks about subtler things that aren't one of the five. So it isn't that the five lay vows are the only thing that the Buddha said about karma. And even the 10 non-virtuous actions aren't the only, they're a larger, more comprehensive list, but we can think about gradations and gray areas and all kinds of other things that are still important. But the 10 unvirtuous actions broadly, they cover like generally most of the major ideas. But the Buddha's expectation is that these coarse behaviors of lying and stealing and killing and, these are things that it's reasonable to say, I will never do again. And still, we might kill a mosquito, we might kill an ant, and then we purify that. But but the Buddha's, it was clear that he didn't expect us to say, I will never think an unkind thought about any sentient being for the rest of my life, because that would be impractical. So like with attachment, like with how we relate to food, how we relate to how much time we spend trying to just entertain the mind by going to plays, going to movies, shows, listening to music, the kind of the eight worldly concerns. That's not really, that's not part of the lay vows. That's not, but it's critically important, and oftentimes it doesn't require that we're actually in relationship with, we're not harming, we're not taking food away from a child, we're not, harming other sentient beings, but we're furthering a way of thinking that's not so useful, that we're empowering kind of a karmic chain, a karmic groove in the mind where, because we haven't really internalized death and impermanence and the suffering of the lower realms, and so we haven't mastered the small scope, and so we're not really someone who practices day and night, and is really doing all of the things that Lama Zopa is encouraging us to learn how to become, and eventually be able to do. So, but still, even though it's not harming others, it's harming oneself.
Right, I understand that. Thank you. Something that you said just a minute ago was that how difficult it would be to vow never to have a negative thought for the rest of your life. And I mean, I kind of hear Venerable Robina's words in that, everything we think and do and say impacts us. And her, I don't even know exactly what the technique is, but when she says unpack and unravel, when she uses those words, is meditating further, is getting into subtler states of mind, the opportunity or technique to look at those subtler states of mind where you see, oh, I remember that thought. I don't need to have those kinds of thoughts. Is that what you're saying and what she's saying?
I mean, I think it's, when we look at like the three wisdoms, I mean, I think it's all interrelated, because the wisdom that arises through listening or reading, or the sort of the verbal definitional level of understanding, and then the wisdom that arises through contemplating, where we actively reflect on sort of more of an active listening. We've understood, okay, this is the definition, this is what generally the topic is about. What are my thoughts on that? How does it relate to this other thing that I've learned? What's unclear? What don't I understand? What doubts do I have? How do I clarify those doubts? And then the wisdom that arises through meditation, where it's actually formal sitting practice of analytical meditation joined with stabilizing meditation. That whole process is all critically important. But then there's also actively applying the antidotes to, like, in situations, so which is also reinforcing that process. So I think, I do think that the better we get at meditation, the more insight that we have into the mind's functioning in daily life. We can see things kind of in slower motion. We can watch the dominoes sort of falling in a different way. We become more familiar with the triggers that are kind of unique to us, because not everybody has. Some people are more, care more about this or that, or so they're triggered by different things. If you insult someone about something of which they care nothing about, haven't really activated any negative karma. But if you touch this other button that they hold very central to their identity, or then now there's a lot of strong, reaction. So I think that we begin to see all of that in more detail, and that's a side effect of getting better at meditation. But also recollecting, in meditation, we might meditate on the kindness of sentient beings, and then when someone is rude to us, if we can in that moment recollect their kindness from past lives, then we've brought what we learned in meditation into our daily experience, and that's also necessary. Or we just, like, we remember a particular quotation, that's in the Lamrim Chenmo in a particular situation. Maybe it just sort of pops into the mind when we're doing something, or and then we make a different choice because we've remembered this impactful, kind of pithy statement, and so we were gonna do this, and now we do that. So that's also, I think, the repetition of integrating these things in our daily experiences is critically important too, because that's ultimately what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to remember these antidotes in increasingly more challenging situations that are actually occurring off the cushion, and then applying them. And if we don't, then again, one technique is to, or if we're like later, if we're like, oh, that was a missed opportunity to apply this antidote, then we do a session of meditation maybe later that day, where we replay and kind of pretend that we are applying that antidote, kind of like that rehearsing, using meditation as a rehearsal process, which again will make it more likely in the moment that we recollect the instruction, that we recollect that way of thinking or acting, and actually relate to others through that lens. And that, I mean, that too, I think that is something a person can practice, maybe at least to some degree, independent of how good of a meditator you are. That's kind of more about just telling yourself, I'm really going to make a strong effort. Like maybe in the morning you do a meditation, and then you take that, the conclusion of that, as your practice for that day. Whether it's loving kindness or death awareness or karma, or and you really try to set a really, really strong intention that you're going to interpret your day using the insight that you gained in that session. And the insight that we gain has a relationship to how good of a meditator we are, and also how many times we've done that meditation. But I think too, it's just about taking it seriously and being active in saying, okay, well, I said I was going to do this, and so I'm really going to try. And then it's just habit, day after day after day after day. It will become more integrated in how we go about that day. Yeah, maybe something like that.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and it just underlines, I think, every time we get together for these sessions, just the amazing capability of our transformative mind. So thank you. That was really helpful.
Any other questions, thoughts? So then day 115, the next contemplation, the quotation is, we need to be convinced that the lower realms really exist. And he says again, and it is highly likely that that's where we will be reborn. So again, for the purpose, and this is again thinking about kind of, to think that, okay, we're in a car and we're headed down a particular path, but we're also behind the wheel of that car. So we can steer it in a different direction, but if we don't, then that inertia, that momentum is going, is taking us down a particular road. Again, like he says, because of the self-centered mind, that is sort of the path of least resistance, that all sentient beings find themselves. It's sort of the default mode of all sentient beings is the mind of self-cherishing and self-grasping. So that has been true for all of our previous incarnations, and it's still true, for us now. Which is why one reason why Tibetan Buddhism is so skillful in giving us ways of transforming attachments, and offering, offering all of our food, offering our drink, offering these objects of attachment, at least then it's a little bit, we've transformed that into an increasingly positive thing, rather than, and even doing that kind of has a taming effect on the mind. It slows us down. There isn't, because the ice cream, the whatever, non-dairy ice cream, of course, the ice cream, whatever it is, normally it's just, we just inhale it, there's no intentionality behind it. And at least with offering, we're slowing that process down and thinking of our gurus, thinking of the Buddhas, and then just that habit changes our relationship to objects of attachment over, slowly over time. So it's a really skillful way. And I know that there's a Venerable Jamyang did a class on kind of bodhicitta mindfulness, and that's on our on the YouTube channel, a couple Dharma Toolkit class about how bodhicitta protects our practice. And so of course, doing things, taking a nap for the benefit of all sentient beings, and thinking, okay, I'm doing this thing, but I'm doing it for the benefit. I'm doing it so that I can continue to practice, so that my practice will be clear and stable and firm, and it's undisturbed by hunger and thirst and tiredness and so on. And then there's that text that Lama Zopa has about training, again, a bodhicitta mindfulness text, where every time you turn on the light, you think you're illuminating the path to enlightenment. Every time you close a door, you think you're closing the doors to the lower realms, so that again, you're transforming these mundane experiences into the path, which can be really helpful. So again, he's saying that this concern that we're trying to develop about this kind of rebirth, he says it's not a numbing fear, but a positive fear that spurs us into action and gives us ironclad determination to practice Dharma. We see the suffering that we are in imminent danger of experiencing and do everything possible to avoid it. Any thoughts, questions?
Well, you could look out your window and decide that the snow is the blessings of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Make it a little bit easier to handle.
Yep. Giving me a snow day out of their great compassion.
Is it snowy? Yeah.
It is, yeah. There's maybe a quarter inch on the posts out there.
Oh my gosh. I've had blue skies all day.
Yeah, I have snow.
We've been photographing a boys' soccer game. That's why we're late.
in the
Any So then the next contemplation, day 116, Lama Zopa is encouraging us to not reject this topic, which is something that even Geshe Zopa was reflecting on, that at Western centers and so on, they avoid this topic. They don't say, well, it's not a valid teaching, but they just try not to bring it up. They try to kind of gloss over it, or because it's not a great marketing tool, for the newspaper and so on. But Lama Zopa is saying, that we kind of this, we can't really look at the path as piecemeal. It's like, oh, I like this piece, but I don't like this piece. So, I mean, we can, but if the goal, if we've accepted the goal of enlightenment, then in that case, I would say that if the Buddha is saying, here's everything that you need to know about how to get that goal, then if we start leaving pieces of it out, I would think we'd have to accept that it's unlikely that we're going to get that result. It's like if you're following a recipe, you can't just decide that you don't need this piece or you don't need that piece, or if you've never made that before, and then you know and then expect that the picture of your recipe is going to look like the picture in the if you're not following all of the steps, you're not using all of the ingredients, you should expect that your result will deviate from the result that this person who gave you that recipe was able to get. But how a person chooses to relate to the teachings, of course, is very personal, and people can decide to have a different kind of relationship to the teachings, and that's fine. But Lama Zopa is approaching it from the perspective that if you're studying the stages of the path to enlightenment, then ultimately you are intending to progress all the way to enlightenment, that is your reasoning for engaging in that particular body of knowledge, and not just sticking with some less formal presentation of the Buddha's teachings. He says, our knowledge is severely limited, while that of the Buddhas is limitless. Yet when we hear about the hell realms, we decide that the wisdom of the Buddhas is superstition, while ours is superior. He says this is very deluded thinking. He says we needed to explore our own limitations rather than reject the teachings. So, yeah, that's why, in the Lamrim Chenmo, in this chapter, it's chapter 10 in the translation that I have, that a lot of what Lama Tsongkhapa does is actually take a person through visualizing, like actually imagining the kinds of rebirths that are being experienced in these different realms, actually talking about subjectively what is happening to the sentient beings in these realms. And so you would literally do these meditations where you imagine that that is what you are experiencing. And what would that be like? What must it be like for the beings who are presently experiencing it? And what would it be like if we had to experience it, if that became our experience, in order to, just like we do that even now. We do that in mundane ways when we're motivated to do the things that prevent the worst kinds of suffering in our realm. And of course, we think that's not really a karmically driven process. We think that, well, if I get a good education and I, so, but still, that plays a role. We can't say that doesn't play a role in keeping us, but still, Buddhism would say it's still ultimately a karmically driven process, whether a person experiences those things. But, that it does seem to be true that there are things that you can do that make it more likely that you'll activate negative, like we know that if you eat really, really awful, food, and you drink and you smoke and you do, you're going to deteriorate the health of your body. Like whatever positive karma you have isn't sufficient to overcome what you're doing to your body. Your body still obeys the laws of physics. So it doesn't, at that point you can overwhelm, and you can also support, you can also do things. But it's also true that there are many people who are doing some of those supportive things, and yet they get some sort of cancer that isn't really amenable to nutrition. Like brain cancers often there's not kind of much you can do as to whether you're going to get a neuroblastoma or something, or you get hit by a truck. So again, it's still a karmically driven process, but there are common sense things that still make reasonable sense to do, and we do those things. Hopefully, we're doing those things, and this is because we know that suffering is real, and we don't want to experience it. We know that a person who does methamphetamine is probably going to experience all sorts of really difficult things, and so we turn away from that. We don't think that that's that could be a story. There could be some sort of global conspiracy to make up. We haven't tested it ourselves. We're just trusting the news reports, the government, the police. It could all be some elaborate hoax about fentanyl and these different things that we're hearing about, and the opioid crisis and all of these things. But we have confidence that all of these sources can't, or almost certainly are not, aligned to lie to the entire world. And so we do some common sense things to try to prevent those sufferings. And if we look at the Buddha as also highly unlikely to be someone who has some motivation to just totally fabricate what his teachings are, we look at the Buddha as reliable and non-deceptive. We think what was it that he would have gotten out of making up these things, that are clearly traceable back to the sutras, and clearly not some sort of later addition and never contradicted by Lama Tsongkhapa, by Padmasambhava, by Milarepa, by Shantideva, reinforced for 2,600 years by every great master who's gotten the result of enlightenment after the Buddha. Then we can have the same sort of confidence that it isn't this sort of elaborate, superstitious hoax that we're just being fed. And what it is the Buddha, out of concern for us, showing us the results of some non-virtuous karmic actions and the results of better, more virtuous karmic actions, and encouraging, like a parent, for their child, encouraging them to grow in a constructive way and avoid negative pitfalls that they themselves have seen in the world, like we do when we try to help people with the knowledge that we have. We know, we've made mistakes in various ways, and we try to help people. We share our knowledge, we share our wisdom, and try to help people who are asking for advice, asking for help. What do I do? And we use our own life experience. The Buddha is only just doing that. He's explaining what he himself has observed, so that we can not get those harmful effects. And it isn't something that he just decided he had nothing better to do but to scare people into, to seeing something. And it's interesting too that like all of the other religious traditions have all seen similar consequences from harmful actions. The only difference Lama Zopa, addresses that either maybe in the next contemplation, and the only difference is that from those points of view, they couldn't see that experience comes to an end. Maybe because maybe they had some great meditators in that tradition, some highly realized beings, but maybe not a fully enlightened being. So it is true that many of those lifetimes last for such an incredibly long period of time that it might have seemed that it was permanent, that either, and they also saw the upper realms perhaps too, which could be where, Lama Zopa theorizes maybe that's where the idea of heaven comes from, because again, you find really similar ideas. But again, and that also is something that lasts for a very long period of time, and perhaps then got misinterpreted as being permanent. So it was like either there's these two options. There's an upper realm or a lower realm, and they just last forever. Whereas the Buddhist perspective is that that's also true, but they're extremely long, but they will come to an end. They're not permanent states. Neither the upper realm nor the lower realm exist forever. It's just that they do exist for very, very long periods of time. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, well, maybe that's the next section is kind of specifically on the hell realms. So I kind of don't want to just leave you with that. I'd rather start that next time, and maybe we can progress to the hungry ghost realm at least by the time that we end. Get a little bit better than that. Anything that it would be helpful to think about for today? Nope. All right, so we'll just leave it there for today. And so we'll end with dedication as we do. So recollect your motivation from the beginning of class. And think that by listening and participating, you've actualized that motivation. That positive energy has been created in your own mind, and think that when it ripens, it will ripen in beneficial ways. So think of all of the vast, incredibly beneficial ways that you would like to dedicate your positive action. All right. So we will pick it up on Monday. Geshe Zopa is leading a workshop on Saturday on something. There is a workshop on Saturday. I'm sure.
Calm abiding.
Right, Mahamudra. Yes. Yes, utilizing, understanding the nature, or yes, because the week after is the retreat on Lojong on mind training. So yes, Saturday is Mahamudra and calm abiding. So should be pretty interesting. So have a good night.
Thanks.